Hello, bruvs. We're back with the After Midnight Ghost Book, a 1981 compilation of basically obscure ghost stories. Half of them, which maybe even two-thirds of which are not even technically traditional ghost stories. But it's from the Franklin Watts Company. Let's get to number 16 or whatever. 17, I believe it is. The 17th story. The Villa Inglese by Esme Dodderidge. That isn't the English name. I don't know what is. The Villa Inglese. We noticed the villa the very first time we did the laborious climb up to Du Ponte to do our shopping. The road to Monte Castello dea Du Ponte, to give it its full title, swept upwards in a series of dizzying hairpin bends across the face of the hillside, and the villa rested comfortably in one of these bends, as in the crook of an elbow. From the road it looked forbidding, with its severe wrought iron gateway flanked on either side by a couple of tall male cypresses. Aren't cypresses trees? How do they know they're male? Anyway, by a couple of tall male cypresses, and at the top of the overgrown driveway, a pair of the dark, squat female trees framing the doorway. All right, there we go. I guess the male cypresses are tall and the females are squat. It was known, we were told, at the Villa Inglese. Why, we asked the Ver, Verduria. Why do these people have to do these foreign topics? Why, we asked the Verduria in the market square, why the Villa Inglese? Who owned it? It was so obviously untenanted, neglected. Why was that? Cara signora, she said, her eyes on the scales as she weighed out my kilo of zucchini. Non si se. No one knows. They say it belongs to some English people, but they don't come any more. What a shame. How long is it since the English last came? She shrugged dismissively. Oh, a long, long time ago. But it isn't an overgrown as all that. But it isn't as overgrown as all that. Yeah, exactly. What? Surely someone must have been looking after it some of the time. She bent down behind the stall to find a bag for my vegetables and busied herself putting them into it. As she said, "Oh, there have been people here sometimes for short periods, in Villa Glatura." On our way down the hill again, we found we could see the hinterland of the villa from above. This quite dispelled the first sinister impression it had made on us. Its sun-drenched vine terraces and its little olive grove spilled down the hillside, with an effect of lovely and slightly careless disarray that was wholly enchanting. The more so, perhaps, by contrast with the neighboring vineyards. These were newly planted by the look of them, and the rows of white concrete supports at first glance had the chilling appearance of the stark crosses in a military cemetery. We realized that the scene of almost cornucopian profusion and lushness which it gave was due to neglect, and we felt a trifle guilty at finding ourselves with such a strong preference for its enticing little glades and alleyways of foliage dappled with sunlight rather than for the prim, well pruned, severely coiffed correctness of its neighbors. On our next visit to Du Ponte, we sought more information from the Verduria. The Villa Inglese is it to let as a holiday villa? Who is the agent? I've no idea, she replied. No one from round here, anyway. That's odd. I wonder how we could find out. It's such a lovely looking house. I'd love to rent it one summer if we could afford it. Ah, it wouldn't suit you at all, Signora. It's not a convenient house. It's cold and damp, and it hasn't been lived in for such a long time that, well, the air's bad, they say. The air's bad, I repeated incredulously. What do you mean? Her voice was hurried and agitated as she replied, well, that's what they say, Signora. I don't know anything about it. You must excuse me. And as she turned away, I saw that she was making the sign of the horns to ward off the evil eye. Of course, we were more intrigued than ever, but none of our casual inquiries from townspeople elicited any more concrete information. Everyone was vague and evasive, professing to know nothing, which seemed highly unlikely in a town like DuPonte, where everyone knew everyone and moreover everybody else's business even better than their own. However, there was really no point in pursuing the matter, for delightful as our daydreams had been, they had no basis in reality. How lovely it would be, we thought, if in some unspecified way we suddenly found ourselves with enough money to buy the villa and come and live in this delightful place. We should restore it to working order and live a life of rustic simplicity and solid worth, tilling the good earth, producing our own olives and grapes. In the evening, after a day of healthy toil, we should sit on the terrace under the vine trellis and sip our very own wine, even though we laughed at our absurdly romantic fantasy. Somehow it cheered our spirits after the return to the realities of London, office life, and the rush hour commuter trains. We had fallen in love with DuPonte absolutely, totally, from the noble medieval piazza on the crest of the hill down to the V-shaped confluence of waters embracing its foot. Here, spanning either arm of the V, were the two narrow, humpbacked bridges that gave the town its name. With its battlements and great bastioned wall, the little town seemed to emerge from the hill like some natural formation. Rocky outcrop and man-made fortress seemed equally part of a natural, untamed landscape. Moreover, it was no museum piece. The ordinary people of the town lived and worked in its castellated palaces, now converted into flats and shops, offices and workshops, where once its soldier princes had lived and ruled. It had a bustling, animated life of its own that delighted us. On weekdays, the square was full of people going about their business, stopping to argue or gossip, except for the afternoon siesta time when shops shut, shutters came down, and the square was left to the ubiquitous pigeons and the lone passerby. But if it was animated and full during the week, on Saturday it seemed to burst its confines. Rivers of people and cars poured down its steep, narrow streets and settled in seething colonies on every visible surface. The cars moved forward at walking pace, seeming to nudge the pedestrians gently in the behind with their bonnets to force a way through. In the piazza, groups of men and women shouted and gesticulated at one another to beat the surrounding din. At the far end of the main piazza stood the cathedral. Its majestic frontage formed the boundary of the square at that end, set laterally to it, like the short arms of a T, were two smaller squares. Here one Saturday we happened across a concourse of men, somberly dressed in what looked like their funeral-going suits. "What do you got, Brobs?" Talking furtively in groups, some of them wore long black cloaks, and every now and again we could tell that something was being secretively drawn out and displayed to a small, tightly knit group of two or three. Here the voices were muted no more than an indistinct conspiratorial mumble. The groups broke and reformed like some complicated formal ballet designed to illustrate the theme of conspiracy. Until one such movement momentarily revealed to us that the sinister merchandise on display was in fact samples of corn. The farmers from the outlying farms for many miles around had brought specimens of their grain crops to show the factors. What the heck does that mean? To show the factors. Quality and price were being discussed and bargains struck as farmers and factors, I guess a factor is a person, circulated with sample and offer until finally two and two they came to some mutually satisfactory arrangement. This and everything else about the place delighted us. As I say, we were in love with it, and with the lover's infatuation, we translated everything about it into a new enchantment. The slight mystery about the empty villa only drew us to gaze on it more lovingly. That winter, we became more determined than ever to return the next summer, and somehow or other for a longer period than a miserable 3 weeks. Wow, poor souls. Even if it meant lying or taking unpaid leave to do so. And in the end, this is what we did, fabricating the story about the loan of a villa for 6 weeks in return for doing the caretaking while the owners were on holiday. The moment we sighted the Villa Inglese on our first day's excursion, we knew it was no longer uninhabited. We had a sudden view of the house from below before we expected to, because the high overgrown hedge had been cut back, revealing the upper portion of the house. We felt an absurd sense of loss and resentment, as though some prized and personal possession had been casually taken by a passing stranger. When we had climbed high enough to look back and see the whole house and its vineyard, we could see the figure of a man seated in front of an easel on the terrace at the rear of the house. We could see, too, that a lot had already been done to reduce the place to order, but without in any way spoiling any of its charm. When we reached the top, we went into the little tobacconist's to buy the local paper. The woman remembered us from the previous year and greeted us warmly. It gave us a pleasing sense of homecoming. We asked immediately about the Villa Inglese, and this time there was no hesitation about the reply. Yes, it had been taken by an English couple once again. Very nice people they were, both of them. Simpaticissimi, she said. The verdure, too, was informative. They intended to live there all year round. Nice young people they seemed. Poor things. Why poor things, I said. Lucky things to be able to come and live here in the lovely house. It's early days yet, she said obliquely. One must hope for the best. Before I could reply to this lugubrious remark, and there goes the lugubrious remark, the verduria turned to greet a newcomer. A pleasant, smiling young woman of about my own age. Here is the Signora Wilson now, she said to me, and to the newcomer, this Signora also is English. Hello, said young Mrs. Wilson. I'm Patricia Wilson. Do you live in Dew Ponte, too? Janet Sedley, I said. No, I'm afraid not. I wish we did. We're only here on holiday. Forgive my asking, but from what the Signora said, I gather you are the people who've taken the Villa Inglese. Why, yes, that's right. I can't help being horribly envious, I said. We were here on holiday last year, and we thought it was one of the most lovely places we'd ever seen. You must come and see it properly. My husband and I would be very pleased to show you over it. At this point, John came up, and my new acquaintance pressed up to finish our shopping and go back with her for a cup of coffee. We demurred, but she insisted that Dick, her husband, would welcome the interruption. He was going through a difficult patch with his painting, and this depressed him. New company would cheer him up, she was sure. Dick was a very tall, thin, finely drawn young man whose face looked surprisingly tired and colorless, for one who must have been spending quite a lot of time out of doors. Patricia, on the other hand, was magnificently bronzed and full of vitality. Dick greeted us warmly, and his melancholy face broke into a smile of considerable charm. He certainly seemed pleased, almost relieved, one would have said, at the interruption, and quietly set out chairs for us on the terrace. "Let's have coffee first," said Patricia, "and we'll show you around afterwards. Don't expect too much, will you? We're only slowly getting it into shape." And off she went. "I'm amazed that you managed to get hold of the place," John said. "Last year, when we asked about it, people were so extraordinarily cagey that we couldn't find out anything at all about it." "Well, actually, we saw it advertised in the English papers," said Dick. "The execution of some estate wanted to get rid of it, and really they were asking such a ridiculously low price that we could hardly believe it. We gathered from them that the local people have some silly superstition about the place. That's really why they were asking so little for it. I suppose there was actually a murder here some years ago, and the local people believe it's haunted." "No, really? A real live ghost? Who is it, the murderer or the murderee?" "Neither, actually. It's supposed to be haunted by a dog." "A dog? Oh no, I can't believe it. A sort of hound of Baskerville's or something? How hilarious." Dick smiled a little thinly, I thought, and I felt rather silly at my frivolous response. But really, who could help laughing at the idea? "Do tell us about it," said John, "if you don't mind, that is." "Mind," said Dick, again a little tetchily, I thought. "Why should I mind? Well, the story's quite absurd, of course, but the murder seems to have caused a lot of bad blood locally. Apparently, an English couple inherited the place through some complicated Anglo Italian marriages in, I think, the wife's family. Anyway, they decided to come and live here. Well, the contadini who'd been cultivating the land had got used to having all the grapes and olives and things to themselves, since the previous people hardly ever came. They'd begun to regard it really as their own, and were furious when the English couple simply walked in and tried to take over. Said John. "I can imagine it. Not very tactful of the English lot." "No, it was a stupid thing to do, and of course there was the most God Almighty row. And the contadino did for the English chap, I suppose," said John. "No, it was a most bizarre thing, actually. The contadino, it appears, had a very savage German shepherd dog, a great big brute of a thing, and he used to set it on the English couple whenever he saw them, used to send it down into the vineyard to chase them out. Attacked the chap several times, apparently, though it never harmed the girl. Anyway, the Englishman naturally got pretty mad about this, so he bought a gun, and the next time the dog appeared on his land, he shot it. I can't say I blame him, but I suppose that hardly did him any good locally," said John. "Well, of course, the contadino threatened to kill him in retaliation, and the chap got so scared, they say, that when he locked up at night, he used to bar and bolt every door and shutter." Dick paused for so long that I thought he had come to the end of the story, and said in some disappointment, "Is that all that happened? And the dog's supposed to haunt the place?" "Well, no, it isn't. All that actually happened. I mean, one night a party of local lads were coming back up the hill very late after the grape harvest celebrations in Basso, whichever, and they heard terrible screams and shouts from the house, and then several shots. Probably, if they'd all been sober, they'd simply have legged it off home, but they'd had quite a lot to drink, of course, and had more courage than usual, so they went and banged on the door of the villa and tried to get in, when suddenly the door burst open, and the chap staggered out, babbling away in English and pointing inside. They went in, and they found the girl full of gunshot wounds, dead on the bedroom floor. And the gun on the bed. Good Lord, what a horrible thing. What happened? I mean, what on earth did they do then? Well, The long and short of it was that the chap maintained that he was woken up in the middle of the night by terrible screams. He saw a huge dog savaging something on the floor and realized it was his wife. He seized his gun, which he always kept loaded by the bed, and shot the dog. But when he managed to get a light, there was no dog, only his wife's body there on the floor, riddled with shot. How ghastly. Was he mad, do you think, or what? God knows. At the trial, when the prosecutor pointed out that the room must have been too dark for him to see, if in fact it was shattered and locked up, as he maintained it had been, he simply said he did see the dog because it was outlined by a faint glow. Like phosphorescence, I suppose. So, of course, the local people reckoned the dog was a ghost, come for its revenge. But the girl's body hadn't been savaged in any way. The only wounds were those from the gunshot. What an eerie story. What happened to the chap in the end? I asked. Was he hanged? No. He hanged himself in his cell, poor devil. Of course, the prosecution made out that it was a crime passionnel, and that he'd shot his wife in a fit of jealousy. Apparently, the contadino bloke whose dog was shot was known as a bit of a Don Juan about the place. Sounds more likely than a doggy ghost, anyway, commented John. By this time, Patricia had returned, and we were drinking our coffee. Is anyone else ever supposed to have seen this ghost creature? I asked. Oh, of course. The local people talk a lot of rubbish about it, said Dick. I wish to God, he added with surprising venom, they control their real dogs instead of blithering on about ghostly ones. There's a bloody animal somewhere that howls like a demented spirit whenever there's a full moon. Come on, Dick, stop getting so steamed up about it, protested Patricia. It's only happened very occasionally. As a matter of fact, I saw it one night. I looked out of the window, and it was sitting up on that knoll on the other side of the river and baying, very melodiously, as it happens. It looked a gorgeous creature. Gorgeous creature indeed, snorted Dick. I'd be tempted to take a pot shot at the thing if I had a gun. Stop being so beastly about it, Dick, said Patricia vehemently. Even if you don't mean it, it's a horrid thing to say. I do mean it, growled Dick. Who does it belong to? I asked. Oh, you know how it is round here. You can never get anything definite out of people if they think you're going to complain. They just look very shifty and say they don't know anything about any dog. The whole thing's ridiculous. I expect it belongs to some poacher fellow whom they all know, and he'd be in trouble if he could prove that it was his dog that was always prowling round our land, the bloody animal. Don't be silly, Dick. Always prowling around our land, that's rubbish, said Patricia hotly. John and I were beginning to feel slightly uncomfortable over this altercation between them about the dog, and Johnny, cut in quickly with an invitation to them to come out and have supper with us at one of the town's trattorias. And so, little by little, our acquaintanceship with them progressed. The occasional meal out together, a drink or a coffee in the little bar in the piazza, the borrowing and exchange of such books as we had. The relationship was never a very close one, however. It remained casual and on the surface. Dick was still strained and edgy, dissatisfied with his old style of painting, but unable to forge a new and individual style for himself. Patricia, on the other hand, seemed filled with an almost electric vitality that drove her for long walks in the country while Dick struggled with paint and canvas. She expressed interest and concern about his work when we were together, but somehow I felt her real attention was elsewhere. There was something in her manner of one who humors a child with pretending interest, but whose real adult concerns are quite other. One night, John and I were sitting out late watching the flickering dance of the fireflies in the Bianchi's orchard. It was as though a myriad of silent searchers were switching minuscule torches on and off between the trees. I had never seen such a sight before. Suddenly we heard far off the the howling of a dog. It was unmistakable, although so muted by distance. It is always an eerie and upsetting sound, and with one accord we got up to go into the house and close our ears against it. A couple of days later, we came upon Dick sitting morosely drinking by himself in the bar in Dupont. We could not do other than join him, though I could see with a sinking heart that he had already drunk more than was good for him. "Hello, Dick, old lad, how's tricks?" said John fatuously, unable to think of anything else to say. "Tricky, that's how tricks are, tricky," said Dick thickly. "Patricia here, too?" I asked stupidly, though could see clearly she was not. No, no, not here. Bloody dog, that's what. Shoot it if I had a gun. Yes, we heard it howling the other night, too. It's a disturbing noise, I agree. Disturbing, disturbing. Downright disgusting's what I call it. Roving around the hillside that time of night in a nightgown. In a nightgown, I repeated disbelievingly. What on earth do you mean? Yes, she did. Went off to find that dog. Just in her nightie. Disgusting, I told her. Came back bloody, pleased with herself, but I'll put a stop to that, I can tell you. Do you mean Patricia went out alone at that time of night to find the dog? What a crazy thing to do. It might have bitten her, could have killed her, come to that. That's what you think. She said it came and licked her foot. She spat the words out with loathing. Licked her foot, filthy beast. I'd put a bullet through it if I got the chance. She's mad as a hatter if you ask me. We got him to sober up with some strong black coffee and then walked back to the villa with him in silence. Patricia was not there, and Dick did not ask us in, but dismissed us as quickly as he decently could. We went home in some disquiet, but still reluctant to get mixed up in this strange quarrel between husband and wife. A couple of days later, again, Patricia came to see us. She was anxious and worried because Dick had now bought a shotgun and had sworn that he would shoot the dog. He'll get involved in some dreadful vendetta or something if he does. After all, it must belong to someone, and it's such a lovely animal. It must be quite valuable. Then you really have seen it, I exclaimed. Of course I have, she said calmly. It's the gentlest creature, honey-colored and so beautiful. Nothing odd or mysterious about it at all. Just that it seems to sense that Dick doesn't like it and slips away the moment he appears. I've seen it in our olive grove several times, but now I don't mention it to Dick because he really has become almost deranged about it. Is it a werewolf, bruv? Neither of us wanted to be dragged into this affair, but we agreed in the end to try to dissuade Dick if the opportunity presented it. A few days went by before we found Dick alone. Again, it was in the bar in Dupont. His appearance shocked us. He was unshaven and looked somehow disturbingly gone to seed. It was rather horrible to have witnessed the deterioration, almost the disintegration of a person in such a short space of time. He looked at us sullenly as we approached his table, barely acknowledging our greeting. The moment we sat down, he leaned forward and said, "You know what? She's in love with that bloody dog. In love with a bloody dog. What do you think of that, then? Eh? Oh, come on, Dick, don't be absurd. Don't you come on me." He cut in dangerously. "She's trying to stop me shooting that son of a bitch." He stopped abruptly and began to laugh. "That's good, that is. That's rich, that son of a bitch. Did you hear what I said? That son of a bitch. Good, isn't it?" "Yes," agreed John, "a very appropriate epithet. But look, Dick, of course she doesn't want you to shoot the animal. She thinks the owner would start some vendetta thing against you, and that's really only too likely, you know. The creature doesn't seem to do any harm, after all, so why not leave it alone?" "Leave it alone? Leave it alone? And have my wife making assassinations?" Why is he stuttering? "My wife making I keep saying assassinations. Assignation. That's right, assignations with it. You can't make assignations with a dog, Dick, I said fatuously. Perhaps I couldn't, and you couldn't, but she can. She has assignations with it all over the place. But I'll put a stop to it. I promise you. She thinks she's going to go and meet it when I'm asleep, but she's not, because I'm going to lock and padlock all the doors and windows and keep the keys where she won't find them. It can howl its head off there, and she won't be able to go to it. He's horribly crazy, I said to John, when eventually we were alone again. I think he's dreadfully sick in his head. Patricia ought to take him back to England to see a doctor. But Patricia, when we saw her, was much less anxious than she had been previously. Go back to England now, she exclaimed at this suggestion. Oh, no, I couldn't. We both love it here. I've never been so happy in my life. But Dick's not at all well, Patricia, really. He's in a very strange state. You know he is. No, really, he's much better now. Oh, he did have a silly fixation about the dog for a while, but he's quite got over it now. Well, I hope you're right, but he didn't seem to have done the other day. Yes, but he was a bit pissed then, wasn't he? He's all right when he's sober. He's been bit silly, drinking too much lately, but he says he's going to keep off it for a bit. To hell with the pair of them, said John when she had gone. I wish we'd never met them. They've really begun to bugger up our holiday. Let's go off somewhere on our own for a while and get them out of our system. We enjoyed our days away, and by the time we came back, we felt we could put the whole thing into perspective. Even so, we did not intend to invite an encounter, and we did not go up to Dupani for several days. Then one night we heard again the howling of the dog, the distant ululations. How do you say that? Ululations. Charged with a savage grief, rose and fell on the night air, and I lay disturbed and shaking in my bed, glad of John beside me and the reassurance of the touch of him. Again and again came the anguished howling. Finally, John got up and shut the window to try to keep out the sound. It was 2 or 3 days before we made up our minds to go over to Dupani. As we approached the Villa Inglese, catching our first glimpse of its upper floor from below, we saw that all its windows were shuttered. Surprising at that time of the morning, as we rounded the bend and looked up to the entrance, we saw a group of people standing uncertainly round the gate. One was the postman, and there was one or two people from the nearer houses and cottages on the other side of the road. They greeted us with a kind of eager relief and asked if we had news of the signori from the villa. No, we hadn't, we said in some surprise. We'd been away and hadn't seen them for nearly 2 weeks. Was something wrong? Well, said the postman, the postbox and the gate hadn't been emptied for 2 or 3 days. Moreover, said the neighboring contadini, no one had seen the signore for at least 3 days, and the windows had remained shuttered. Perhaps, I said hesitantly to John, they've gone to England. Do you think that Patricia had enough sense to take him home after all? But inside myself I did not believe this. A little group of us went up the drive and knocked at the door. I don't think anyone had expected an answer, and none came. We stood around uncertainly, and then John and I walked round to the back of the house. All the doors and windows were tightly secured, but the furniture was still out on the terrace, and Patricia's gardening tools were propped up against the wall of the little flower garden she had planted just below the terrace. It was extremely unlikely that they would have gone leaving these things lying about. Someone went off to fetch the police, but I knew long before they came and broke down the door what they would find there. The 2 bodies, Patricia lying on her back on the floor in a pool of dried blood, shot through the heart, and Dick on the bed, the the shotgun beside him. But what I had not foreseen was the savage mauling of Dick's body. At the inquest, it was established that the terrible lacerations of his throat had been the immediate cause of death. These and other wounds on his body seemed explicable only in terms of savaging by some ferocious animal, but every door and window was locked and barred. There was no evidence of entry or exit, no evidence anywhere of any presence, except these otherwise inexplicable wounds. These irreconcilable facts manifested themselves to all of us in that room on that dreadful morning. We could not meet one another's eyes, and our fear was a palpable presence. As the police unshuttered the windows and allowed the morning light to stream in, I saw a huge honey-colored dog standing under the big vine below the terrace. For one moment, its eyes looked deep into mine with an intense searching look before my voice came back and I heard myself cry out, "Oh my God, he's there in the garden. Look." John sprang to the window and looked out. Then he spun round, staring at me with a frightened, questioning look. "Jan," he said, "Jan," but there's nothing there. He seized me by the arm and shook me urgently. "There's nothing there, Jan," he repeated. "Nothing at all." Scary, buddy. At least that one was somewhat interesting. That's all. 37 minutes down the drain.